Hello and welcome back to Regenesis Sanctuary, where I build a habitat in Planet Zoo for an animal that is endangered in the wild while I tell you some facts about the real-life animal. Last time we rebuilt this Bengal-style temple for the gharial, and today we'll be adding the Bengal tiger to it. I'm gonna start off by shaping the terrain. I want there to be a moat next to the pathway for the guests, so you can see the tigers in the entire area because of the height difference. Even though tigers are cats, they are actually very good swimmers, and they enjoy it as well, which is why zoos usually recommend having some type of water for them for enrichment. As an added bonus, it's a great way to keep them from escaping, as long as it is steep enough on the other end. The guidelines for this are having a moat of 8 meters wide with 1.8 meters of depth from the side of it, which is why right here I'm using some concrete pieces to measure it out to make sure the moat is wide and deep enough. Then it's time to create a pathway for people to enter the temple and put in the actual barriers to the habitat. To make sure the tigers can't get out of the water, I'm putting in this concrete wall on the guest side. Tigers have had the IUCN status of endangered since 2018. This actually includes 6 different subtypes of tigers, including the Bengal tiger. Because they are endangered, it is important to preserve their existence within zoos, which is exactly the goal at Regenesis Sanctuary. Part of the temple will actually function as their indoor habitat, so I'm putting in an entrance to the outside part and of course some flooring. Then it was time to create this little custom wooden fence out of the Indonesian wood. Nothing fancy, but just something that fits with the style and I can use throughout this habitat. The Bengal tiger used to live in most of Southeast Asia, but these days its natural habitat has unfortunately decreased a lot. Right now it only lives in India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan and southwestern China. But of course it is called the Bengal tiger, so that's actually the main reason that I picked a Bengal architecture style for this area. And it was just kind of perfect that the gharial happened to live in the exact same region. After the custom fence was done, I extended it a little bit and then put it all along the guest side of the habitat. This doesn't need to keep the tigers in, but it does function to keep the humans from falling into the water and giving the tigers a little midday snack. To finish off the concrete wall a little bit nicer, I used these temple pieces as a border. They didn't quite line up with the fence that well, so in some places I put some mulch in to create sort of planters that I'll put some plants in later. Then it was time to start on the most detailed part of this habitat, which was actually the path and the bridge towards the temple. This of course needed adequate support, but also a wall and a roof to keep the tigers from entering the path and mingling with the guests. For the supports, I took the pillars that are in the temple itself and copied them over to the bridge to make it fit in with the same style. I put in these arches to let the water through. I then adjusted the path a little bit so I could also create an arch so that the tiger could get from the one part of the habitat to the other. And then I closed the rest off just using some brick. So what exactly are the reasons that tigers are endangered? Unfortunately, they are being hunted quite a lot since the 1990s, which has taken a large part in their declining population. Another one of the reasons is their habitats are being broken up by the building of roads and cities. And then there are also a couple of infectious diseases that decrease their population. For the walls of this bridge, I'm using some more temple pieces with some of the Indonesian wooden rods. I copied this small design over along the entire edge of it. Then I started making the roof using these twilight planks and some more Indonesian beams. Once I had a small section of roof I was happy with, I copied it over to the entire straight part of the path. Once I reached the curved section, it got a little more tricky, so I made a selection making one of these pillars and a piece of roof so I could copy it over and turn it to line up with the path. Once I finished the one side, I started on the other side as well. And afterwards I finished off closing the roof top. This was really pretty finicky and it took me a very long time to align all the right pieces, but in the end it looks pretty smooth and I'm happy with it. Of course, these giant holes in the walls are not very safe yet, so I put in some mesh. At first I wanted to put in glass because it does seem a little bit safer, but unfortunately the glass was a little bit too thick to fit in here quite right, so I decided to go with mesh instead. In a real life zoo, I don't think that would be up to code. This bridge through the habitat was actually inspired by a real life zoo. They have a similar setup in Blijdorp, if I remember correctly, in the Netherlands. And it really gives you a very close-up look from the tigers in a lot of different angles. To make sure the tigers can't enter the temple, I added some mesh in between these openings as well. And I actually didn't want them using the second piece of water, so I added some mesh underneath the bridge to block that off. There are still quite some big holes in the habitat borders, so I made a custom rock wall to close that up. The tiger population has been declining for a while, but actually since about 2010 it has started to slowly climb again, which is very positive, and also partially due to several organizations that try to help the tigers thrive. These organizations focus mostly on anti-poaching activities and educating the local people about the situation around the tigers and helping them deal with living together with one of these large predators. This helps creating less threat for the tigers in the wild. For the borders of the indoor habitat, I put in some one-way glass just to give the tigers some privacy. Once they were in, I lined it on the bottom with some more temple pieces. I also put these on the other side where the gharial habitat is. And then it was time to add the tigers to see if this habitat was actually usable. Turns out they couldn't actually enter the indoor area through this opening, so I made it twice as big and that fixed the problem. But they still didn't quite have enough space, so I did end up removing the pillars in the indoor habitat, just like I did for the gharials. Don't worry, they're not all lost, because some of the pillars still remain in the area where the people will be walking. Then I started painting the terrain. I started making a mix with some soil and grass to make it look a bit more natural, but I'll be adding a little bit more detail later. Next, I created some rock formations to create a bit more interesting landscaping. After the rock formations are in, I added the necessary enrichment and food and water items. I also added in some large trees, mostly around the rock formations, and this also showed me which pathways the tigers were most likely to take to their enrichment items. I decided to highlight these pathways with more detailed soil, because that is actually something I've noticed in real life zoos as well. You can really see which pathways the tigers are used to taking because there's just a lot less plants over there. And I always think it gives a very nice little detailed part about what their life is like. To make the path stand out a little bit extra, I put some grass around the rock formations, so it's obvious that they don't walk as much over there. Time to add some plants to the habitat. I always love using reeds on the edge of water, and this time I decided to mix the two types of reeds together for a little bit more detail. Then I went in with the drin grass, and I really did place quite a lot of this around every area where the tigers don't walk that much. I did sink it into the ground a little bit so it wouldn't stand out too much, but I really like that it creates an illusion of long grass and where the grass has completely disappeared because of the tigers walking. We still needed a lot more plants after this, so I took out the scaeviola bushes and scattered those around as well. To make the bridge seem a little more natural, I added some ivy to that. This time, as opposed to the other habitats that I did, I used the corrugated ivy, which is actually the first time I've used it. I do like the look of this ivy better, but I feel like the other ivy just comes in shapes that are a little bit more easy to use, which is why I tend towards that one, but I decided to give this one a try this time. For a little more variation, I added some ferns here and there as well. I also camouflaged the feeding area a little bit more with some more rocks. This doesn't actually affect the animals being able to get to it, and it does look a lot better. And for some final plants in the water, I added these water hyacinths to make it a little bit less empty and more lifelike. For the inside area, I did want to keep it relatively simple, so I just made this simple climbing platform so the tigers could have a little bit of variation in height to choose from. I also added some bedding so they could sleep comfortably, and I added some more ivy on the walls. Back to this little custom fence that I made some small alterations to it so it would be a little bit more suitable for inside, and then placed it along the glass wall of both the tiger and the gharial habitat just to make it a little better looking. I also placed one of these fences up on top of the area where you can view the gharials from above, because as one of you very accurately commented in the comments, we do not want people to fall into the gharial habitat. So this should fix that problem. For some finishing touches, I edited the entrance to the temple a little bit so that it lined up with the bridge a little bit neater, and then I placed some donation boxes and trash cans inside these pillars so that the guests can use them, but they're not actually visible. Of course, we need some education as well, both for gharial and the tigers, so I created this custom board using some wood beams, just one of the education screens, and some more of the temple decorative pieces that I used on the outside of the temple as well. Education into endangered species is really important, not in the least because it can raise some money for organizations trying to help certain species, but also just to create more awareness overall of what is happening with these animals. I copied this same style of education board around the temple a couple of times, and I did also add a speaker so the entire temple can hear about the tigers. Finally, I also hid some benches in these temple bricks so that the people can sit on the benches and it seems like they're just sitting on the edge of the habitat, which of course is perfectly safe because of the glass that is there. I almost forgot, but I said I was gonna add some plants along the fence in these little planters, so I ended up doing that at the very end. And with that, the habitat is finished, and the guests can enjoy this beautiful majestic cat from all angles before they enter this Bengal architecture style temple and can watch the gharials as well. The tigers themselves also seem to be quite happy with the habitat, roaming and jumping around and scratching these trees. This is the final habitat of our Asian temperate area, which means it's gonna be time to start the next area pretty soon. This is either gonna be an African savannah area or the Asia jungle area. But I'll leave it up to you to decide which one I am gonna do next. So if you have any preference for these two, please let me know in the comments. As you may have noticed, I decided to do something different this video with adding some more facts about the conservation status of real-life tigers, and I hope you found it interesting and enjoyed watching. If you did, please feel free to subscribe to join for the next video, and until then, have a nice day. Bye!